This is an interview with Jake Schneider for the Valley Historical Project. The interviewer is Harriet Blockus, and I'm assisted by Ken Blockus. And the date is May 4th, 1998, and we're at the home of Jake Schneider. And we'll start out, Jake, you tell us your name and where and when you were born.
I'm Jake Schneider, and I was born in July 6, 1922, in the same location we're sitting right now.
Okay, and can you tell us a little bit about your parents? Where and when they were, you don't have to have when, but where they were born?
Well, both parents were born in Clayton County. My dad was born on the north side of the river in Norwegian country, and my mother was on the south side of the river, directly across.
In the Swiss.
Swiss territory.
And how did they get across the river?
Well, they must have got across some way, but there was a bridge built by my grandfather back in, but that was after they were married.
Well, that was after they were married. Well, can you tell us a little bit about that bridge? I've seen pictures of it.
Well, it was a hanging bridge, and of course, my dad's side lived on the north side of the river, and they went to the Apostolic Church on the south side, and that shortened the trip to get to church.
Quite a bit, wouldn't it?
Quite a bit. Otherwise, they had to go up around Elgin.
Would the bridge be down by Roger Frieden's then?
No, it's pretty much between Ryerson and John Schaefer in there.
Right in there.
Yeah.
What did they make the bridge out of?
Well, wire braided together. It was a hanging bridge.
What happened? Yeah, suspension. What happened to it?
Well, it flooded 3 years in a row, the Turkey River, and in 1916 was one of the highest years it had ever been, and it came up and took the bridge out. And it took the wood pile from my dad's house, and that's when they decided to go to higher ground.
Well, I can see why. Would you tell us your father's and mother's full names?
My dad's name was Fred J. Schneider. My mother was Elizabeth Geary.
And did any of your relatives immigrate to the United States?
Well, our grandparents would have
Would have been your grandparents. In which countries did they come from?
From Switzerland, and my grandmother would have been part English, so she would have came from England, I guess.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about your education, where you went to school?
Well, I went to rural school about a half a mile south of here, Elyria, number 1, and we had to carry water to school.
Everybody talks about that they had to carry water.
I don't know why they didn't have us bring water, but they let 2 of us boys go and get it, and of course we would take as long as possible to get it.
I remember I was always so short that and it was hard for me to carry water with someone, and I was so glad when they finally would let me go for water. You remember anything else about your rural school?
Well, not too much. In the first 4 grades, I had several different teachers. I don't remember just all of them, but the last one was Leon Kerr. And then in the 5th grade, my sister, Ruth Metzger, or Schneider, she started teaching there. And I remember the election was everybody in the district voted, and it looked a little different, but they were fishy. My dad was elected director, and he hired his own daughter. But that was...
Well, I think she did a good job.
Somebody else was behind the whole deal. It wasn't my family behind it.
I think I read in the paper that Mary Suter went to Ruth's, and she was a good teacher.
But Mary's grandmother was instrumental in getting my dad elected and my sister hired as teacher.
Okay. So then that pleased the family.
Yeah.
Okay, can you tell us more about anything more about the rural school, or would you want to go on to high school?
I really not too much about the rural school, but I remember going to high school and we walked.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and if anything was going on at night, why I'd have to walk home. But we didn't think anything of. I was just happy if I had permission to go to extra activities and didn't bother walking home.
Did you do any special activities in high school that you'd want to share?
Well, my folks were, of course, they wanted the kids to work. Were kind of against sports, but I did get to go out the junior and senior year, and I played football in those 2 years. But
Six-man team?
yeah, six-man football, and there wasn't too many kids in school, so we had much more chance of getting on the team than you would today. Today you'd have to start way down in the grades to be good to get on a team.
How many were in your class, do you remember?
We started out with 24 and ended up with 13.
Ooh, what happened to everyone?
Well, some moved away, but a lot of them quit. And we did lose one girl died. There was a sophomore year
And what year did you graduate?
in 40.
Oh, were some of them, well, no, the war hadn't started yet.
No, but those days, a lot of them just never finished high school. My folks were about one of the first in that church down there to go to high school. All of my older brothers and sisters went to high school. But then the grandparents were teachers, so they believed more in education than a lot of people did.
Okay. Can you think of any of your classmates who are still living?
Yeah, Geraldine Matthews, or Wilson up here, and Claire Heck, they were classmates, and Jean Shorey.
Oh, Gene Shorey was
Yeah.
too.
But Connor Newman but he's gone. There's just not too many. I don't think there's over 9 left out of the 13.
Do you ever get together?
We've only had 2 class reunions in those years. But most of them moved away, you know. Us few that are left here, we'd get together, you know. But as far as the class reunion,
You kind of saw each other anyway.
yeah.
Okay. Would you like to tell us a little bit about going to the Apostolic Church when you were little?
Well, I remember in the winter time that we went by horses and sled, and it was Swiss or German. I don't believe there is a Swiss language. It's
No.
German, but my folks never talked that, so I really didn't get much out of church because I couldn't understand a word they said. About all I remember is when they called us for dinner.
And what did you have for dinner?
Well, they had bread and jam and butter, you know.
Not cheese?
Not in those days.
Not in those
No,
days.
no.
I always thought they had cheese.
No, I don't remember it back then.
Okay.
But,
Well, in the wintertime then, when you went by sled, could you go across the river if it was frozen?
no, I lived up here.
Oh, you lived up here by that time.
But we would cut through the farmers' fields. You know, we didn't go down towards Elgin. We'd cut through by Danny Lehman's and that. So it probably cut a couple miles and go down by Bert Tolman's.
And that Apostolic Church was not where it is now.
No, that was moved. And they had barns then that you put your horses in. The church was forenoon and afternoon.
You want to tell us where the church was located for future people?
Well, it's located on the south side of the river. I don't know what the official street is now. Those days we call it the Dutch Bottom.
Right.
And,
why was it called the Dutch Bottom?
well, I suppose it's because it talks Swiss.
Okay. All right. Good. Then, when you were married, you want to tell us a little bit about when you got married?
Well, I got married in 1947 at the Gunder Church.
And you married a Norwegian?
No, but
You married a Norwegian.
yeah, oh yes, I married a Norwegian. Yes, yeah, and anyway, I had heard, well, several other weddings where the best man passed out, but they were lengthy weddings, and if this would have lasted a minute longer, I think they'd have carried me out. It was a very hot night in August.
So you weren't nervous, you were just hot.
Both nervous.
Did you have a big wedding then?
Yeah, it was. I thought it was big, and of course, those days, people didn't have much money, and the invitations were sent out on a penny postcard.
Really?
Yeah, and everybody did it at that time. Penny. I know my friends that we associated with. Was the invitation, and I remember there was a lot of gifts.
Then you went to which church? Highland?
No.
We went to Gunder.
Gunder, and then Elgin started the Lutheran church.
Then you went. Then you changed to Elgin when that church was built.
Yeah.
Do you have any idea when that was?
No, I really don't remember.
Must have been in the 40s, or early 50s.
It must have, yeah.
Because
Because
I'm trying to remember if it was. I don't think it was the church built, or was it just barely built when I came in? I came in 51.
I think that's about 50.
yeah.
Somewhere in there. And so then you have been a member of that church for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And your children have gone there too.
Yeah.
And would you like to tell who your children are?
Well, our oldest is Patricia Catay. She's married and has 3 girls. Let's see, about 14, 16, and 18. And they live out in a suburb of Boston. Sudbury is the town. And Fred, he's next. And he's single, and he lives at home here with me. He works at the Valley Clock in Claremont.
So he lives in the same house?
Yeah.
Okay.
And Jim, he's works for the federal government in Des Moines, and he lives in Ankeny. And he's married a Montana girl. And she works there too.
I wanted to be sure and ask you about the children, because the last 2 people I interviewed didn't have children, so all of a sudden I thought, I mustn't forget. Okay, and you have, tell us about what residences, where you have lived in your lifetime.
Well, I was born in the same location here. The house burned when I was a year or less than a year old, and they built this home, and it's a modern home, and there was only 3 farms between Claremont and Volga that had electricity in those days.
In what days now?
In 1917.
Okay.
And the transformer was the same one between Ruttlisberger's and us. And when there was severe storms, the transformer would catch fire usually. And this one particular time, that was the old house. It let the full load come in, the current, and it melted the light fixtures in our house here. And but it never went to the barn. And at Ruttlisberger's at the same time, it went to the barn and burnt their barn, but didn't go to the house. So that seems kind of strange how electricity works.
Did insurance cover that then?
Well, I imagine the insurance company. But that was common for the transformers. They couldn't take lighting in those days.
Now, when you got married, did you live in the little house that's next to this?
Yes. A small house, and that's where we raised our family. And after everyone passed away in the big house here, my wife and me moved up here. We didn't need it, but she loved it.
She loved that extra space.
And she liked antiques.
Okay, that's your house. This house is rather unique because you have lots of antiques. Could you tell us a little bit about some of the antiques you have?
Well, the original stove that was put in here, Home Comfort, is still workable in the same spot, and we have.
How long have you had that?
Well, that's been in the house ever since it was built, 1923.
Do you ever use it?
Well, it's workable. My wife used to fire. We haven't this last year, but I lighted it up. I mean, it's workable, and everything in the house is the same, except the kitchen has been remodeled.
Does your telephone work?
Yeah, well, it would, but it don't go no place now. It's workable.
Why don't you take your caps down so that we can see it a little better?
We have 2 telephones, and
Yes, it does ring. Oh, good.
anyway, years ago that was the way you got sale notice from the grocery stores in town that something was on sale, and it'd be one long ring.
Now, can you ever remember sitting up to that stove and putting down the oven door and putting your feet on it?
Not really, because you see, we had such a warm house here with those radiators.
Oh.
I never knew what a cold house was except when I went to visit. I only had one grandparent, and or went to visit classmates. Now I would stay with Connor Doomer with every county tournament year, and we'd go to West Union to the tournaments. And in the bedroom there, it would freeze, and I just couldn't
Believe it, huh?
Yeah, because our house here we suffered more from overheating than not heat.
You had radiators. Ken, maybe you could take a picture of that. It's right here. Can you get that? That's not so common. And did you burn wood?
Burn wood, and of course you see the radiator heat holes, and so our house was just as warm in the morning as it was at night, and
I want to ask what this is over here on the wall. Can you get that, Ken?
this has the original heating system, the radiators in, that was built in here, and the original wiring. It was wired in conduit, which was rare in those days.
Mm.
And we have changed two furnaces, but it's still the same radiators.
But you've always collected antiques. But what is this on the wall?
Well, that's an apple peeler.
Oh, yeah. Well, we have an apple peeler, but that must be a
Same principle as that.
okay. And you have lots of antiques up on the top here. I've noticed that.
And that sitting on top of the TV there is the controls off of the dash of my dad's first automobile.
Oh, really?
And
What kind? Tell us about that car.
well, Dad bought a 1917 Cadillac. He figured he'd buy a good one. He'd only buy one in a lifetime. And the Depression come in a few years, and he couldn't afford to run it. So he junked it. But everything he could hang on the wall in the machine shed, he did. And I just found those 3 years ago. And there's a gas pressure gauge, which is rare in a car. In those years, you had to pump up the gas to get it from the tank to the engine until it was running, and it'd go on its own.
Well, don't you have an old car out in your...
Well, that's one I cobbled up, but I have a coffee table, which you can see in the other room here, made out of that Cadillac.
You do?
A wheel, yeah.
Well, I don't know if you want to... Shall we wait a little bit?
So-
Okay, and we'll get to... We may go take a little tour, okay? Now, you were a farmer
Yes.
all your life.
Yeah.
Tell us about some of the changes you went through and some of the kind of farming that you did.
Well, when I grew up, we were milking by hand, and we milked 22 cows, and of course we were the tail end of the family, so our help got less every year. But my brother and me, we milked 22 cows by hand and walked to high school morning and night, and we didn't think nothing of it.
When did you get milking machines?
Well, my dad bought a milking machine after everybody left but him and me. And he didn't like to milk. And when I come home from school one day, there was a new milking machine in the barn.
You know have any idea when?
Well, I would have been in about 40, I guess.
About in the 40s.
In 1940, because this last year I was home.
Now, how did you happen to get into turkey farming?
Well, my sister Marie graduated in 1928, and she got 2 broods of turkeys from Maggie McGreevy at Claremont. And she hatched them out under a hen. And Adolph Weibel run the milling company in Elgin, and he carried her feed bill for those turkeys. And when she sold them in the fall, she realized that it was pretty good money. So the next year she increased production, set more hens. And then a brother started with her later on, and my dad, and they just kept increasing turkeys as they made money. They'd increase production and building brooder houses and stuff, and they kept their own hens. And there's still 2 incubators in the basement here. The basement was full of incubators, and lamp incubators. And they were turned by hand twice a day. And then I believe in about 48 they quit hatching and went to buying poults. But they raised up to $22,000 a year. And a number of years before that, they dressed them in the little house where I raised our family. It's been added on, but they'd hire about 6 or 8 women to pick them, the pin feathers, and they were shipped to Chicago by railroad or truck, mainly railroad, with the insides in. That was considered New York dressed. And they
Insides in?
Yeah.
Well, how did they pack them in ice?
No, and they had no refrigeration here. But they were that, and some went to New York City even. But that's the way everything was shipped. Was considered New York dressed with the guts in them, and they did that for many years. And
how many years were you in the turkey business?
well, from 28 till I think 56, and it was big business those days. One year they shipped 85 truckloads of turkeys. Those were alive out of here.
I was going to say, did you ship mostly alive ones?
Well, in later years when they got the big numbers, they were dressed either in Calmer or Elkader had a dressing plant, and Sumner. And but for many years they dressed them themselves. And
how many turkeys was the most you ever had at one time?
22,000 in a year. And they were raised out in the open.
I think you were still raising turkeys when I came here in 1951.
And another thing, a little interest, when I was a boy in high school yet, my brother would dress our veal calves. Now they would be gutted, but they were just gutted and sewed together and a tag put on, shipped to Chicago by train. No wrapping or nothing, just the hide left on. And we got big money for a veal calf those days.
Why did you quit turkey farming?
Well, they got their health, my brothers. And I never was in it.
Oh, you were never in it.
I never got any money. But as a kid, I had to help. My dad was in it on a percentage. So I was, I can't say I never got any money. They paid me for some of the work I did.
But you were never in it officially?
Not as a partner, no.
No. So what was your farming operation?
Well, I milked cows and...
in the barn across?
Yeah, and then raised hogs. And then the traffic got to be quite a problem here. and the road dusty. The road goes between our building, and we had to chase the cattle across. You know, that was before they dry lotted cattle. And so I kind of got, thought it wasn't too safe chasing cattle here, and then I went into beef business and hauled. And I had over 250 head of beef cows there for a few years, and I rented quite a little land from different people around here. And I never bought this place till, I guess, about 1980, and I've been here ever since.
Your wife worked for a number of years. You want to tell a little bit about what Eileen did?
Well, she worked as an aide in the nursing home for 18 years. The reason she went to work, I was not feeling well years ago, and the wages were not good, but I had to cut back a little farming, and I remember she said the wages were not, and I told her, well, 50 cents a day is better than nothing. Mm-hmm. And she started, and then a few years later I got to feeling better, but she didn't want to quit. So,
she enjoyed that work.
Yeah.
But that was rather unusual for a farmer's wife to be working off the farm in those days.
Yeah, but she enjoyed it very much, and then when I retired, well, I said she had to quit. And we were retired for, I guess, 13 years.
13 years, okay. If I were to, could I go back a little bit to the going back what Elgin was like, the Apostolic Church? Can you tell us what the old church was like?
Well, the Sunday school room, and quite a bit of it was stone, and of course nothing was modern in those days. But then they moved part of that church, the wood part, up to Elgin years later. And I remember we'd always try to sit beside some old man, which wasn't too much older than I would be today, but he'd have some candy, and us little kids, that was really a treat if they'd have a little treat for us,
I think Ken did the same thing, and said by somebody that gave him candy. Well, that made that service go faster when you didn't understand it.
That's right.
And the men sat on one side,
and
the women sat on the other side.
Now, all the other young folks in that church could understand the language, but our family was the only one, the latter part of the family, that couldn't speak Swiss, so we didn't get much out of it.
And you had no piano or organ?
No.
And you had no, ordained pastor?
No. And the first preacher I remember was my grandfather. He was a preacher there for many years. And later on, they would, I think once a month, have an English service in the afternoon, and he would be the one that would do the preaching, because he knew the English language real good.
How did he get to be chosen pastor?
Well, they just picked him out of their congregation, and of course he was a school teacher, and we figure school teachers are a little smarter, so.
Sometimes. And the apostolic religion came from Switzerland. I mean, they brought that.
Yeah, but my grandfather was a Lutheran. This Grandpa Ging was a Lutheran as a young man over in Switzerland.
Oh, he was?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, he was a Lutheran. But then he came out to Ohio, and they had an apostolic church there. And I really kind of wondered too how he got, being he married a Lutheran lady, but
and how he got to be the minister.
Yeah, how he was apostolic, because he was not raised that way. raised as a Lutheran.
That was unusual, wasn't
Yeah,
it?
yeah.
Because
Yeah.
if you,
And his wife, well, Clark, the Clarks I know are Lutherans now. Whether she would have been back in those days, I don't know.
and if you aren't born apostolic, do you get to be a member of the church?
Well, anybody can join the church, but this church here got awful small because of the language. If you get away from here, they've got large churches. But here, they stuck with the Swiss too much. And my age group, just about everybody left the church. And of course, they married somebody. They got across the river.
And do you remember on Sunday nights when you would go and as a child, and did they have those singing times?
Yes. Well, yeah. They'd get together in the home, and of course that was a big deal for us guys. We didn't get out too much, but yeah, we enjoyed that, getting together.
Okay, when you were a child and you went downtown, did you ever go downtown on Saturday night?
Well, not really as a child, but once
Just a
I
minute.
got...
You have to turn the tape over. I'll ask you that question again. Okay, if you were going downtown, Jake, on Saturday night, what was Elgin like?
Well, my memory, I was, of course, I imagine 16 before I got to go downtown, and of course I'd hitchhike down, rode with some old neighbors here, and on Saturday night the town was full, and I believe they had band concerts, and of course the gals would be walking up and down the sidewalks, and us guys, if anybody had a car, we'd meet somebody while we'd start driving up down the street. Maybe before the evening was over, why get together. But that was a regular routine. Open night was the gals walking.
Do you remember the first movie you went to?
Well, in Elgin, I went, and they had some live actors there, I remember. Now, I can't remember what it cost, but it couldn't have been much. And how they could afford to come, I imagine, well, someone would play 2-3 parts, but it probably was, I don't know, 5 or 6 in the group that we put on a...
Was this at the Opera House?
Yeah, at the Opera House.
And then burned down?
Yeah. But I remember, boy, we thought that was really something. Of course, those days it didn't take much to entertain people,
What was the farthest away you would go?
Well, to McGregor, I remember as a kid.
How did you get there? By car?
Once in the summertime, yeah. We'd go in this Cadillac car with Lawrence Gearing's. Of course, Lawrence loved to go.
He was a fun person.
And we loved, whenever it would rain, why, usually Lawrence and my mother were brother and sister. He'd bring 2 or 3 of the kids and come up here, and he'd raring to go to some neighboring town and look at some machine or an automobile. And I remember once in a while we'd get to go with it, but usually we'd have to pull weeds.
Did you ever take the train anywhere?
Yes, I did. When I graduated from high school, I worked for Frosty Welch for a few months, and he took me to Waterloo and to work in a gas station. And all there was down there was Cadillacs, big cars, to train me to come back here to service cars. And when I come home, why, I rode the train to Owine, and then I changed to the Rock Island and come to Elgin by train. Now that would have been in 40. And I remember coming down through Echo Valley very cautiously, but that old caboose was really rocking, and high bridges, and I roomed at Mel Kohler's across the street there in Elgin, and they put in a shower for me in the basement, and Leota Welch would usually serve me breakfast.
She was a nice lady.
Yeah, and I remember, well, they stayed open, you know. In the evenings it was open in town, and of course the roads were dirt, and a lot of farmers would come in if it rained to get their chains put on, and I never liked that too good, you know. If the boss wasn't there, I would lock up as soon as I could.
And when was as soon as you could?
Well, not very much.
10 o'clock?
Maybe 10 minutes ahead of time. Yeah, probably 10 too. But anyway, I remember Doc Jerdee come in there, and I put on his chains once, and that's the only guy that give a tip back there.
Did you ever work at the canning factory?
No.
Did you ever raise sweet corn?
Yes, we did. But late life, once and that's the last.
Why?
Well, it went down so bad.
Oh.
And they left most of it in the field. They didn't even bother to pick it. But so my experience with sweet corn was, anyway, that was left, and a nephew of mine, him and his wife, wondered if they could pick it. You know, on shares, I said, you can have anything you pick. But anyway, they decided why the people had big families years ago. That was to do the work, the kids.
If you think back, was there any traditions, that Swiss traditions that have now disappeared? Like foods or clothing or just anything that's different?
Well, I grew up, of course, on homemade bread and sorghum and homemade butter. But being of a large family and with my brothers and sisters and dad in the turkey business, we always had hired help. And my mother probably cooked for more people than anybody in the area during when they'd dress the turkeys. She would set a table up for 10 or 12 people twice each meal.
Wow.
And one of those girls would come up maybe a half hour before serving time and help her. So that bread, and I remember as a kid, I was ashamed of that bread in school, you know, dark bread soaked with molasses and butter. And we'd break it off in the dinner pail and put it in our mouths quick. Now I would give anything to have some. That was good stuff. But at the time, we envied, you know, the neighbors
The boughten bread.
they had boughten bread.
And now we don't buy much. We don't buy much bread in our house because Ken makes it in the bread machine.
Well, that's good.
So we do that. Okay. Now, you were in the service. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that?
Well, Jack Hayden and me went in together. And,
Don't push this away, or we won't get
and
you picked up.
we went in together, and we were in Great Lakes. Well, we were separated, but still close by. We could see each other for 6 weeks of boot camp.
And what year?
That would have been in, I suppose, 41. And I went to the East Coast, and he went to the West Coast, and we never seen each other again until after the war. And I was on mainly convoy duty. I crossed the Atlantic 10 times and went through the Panama Canal and crossed the Pacific 6 times.
What was the name of your boat?
Well,
you just change boats all the time?
No, I was on a destroyer for one trip across, but then the rest of the time was 2.5 years on the battleship Texas. And we took part in Okinawa and Iwo Jima from the beginning to the end. That was after the war was over in Europe. And I seen the flag raised on Iwo Jima within an hour after it was raised. We were that close to the island. So, guess that's...
Do you have any, see, were you married then?
No.
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 No, when you went, and
No, I was single. Seen a lot of water.
saw a lot of water. But is this quite an experience when you've never been away from home much?
Yes, it was. I really never got homesick. It was rough when you come home till you got out of sight. But I remember at Great Lakes, they had hammocks. And of course, if you let go and then you were flipped out. And there was a farmhouse across the street from us, and I'd give anything to sleep in the bed.
Now, do you think the lifestyle now has changed for the better or for the worse? Would you like to go back, or would you prefer to go forward?
I wouldn't mind going back if I would know what I do now. But we had a good life. We were, I think, happier with simpler things. Now going to, well, as I said, I only had the one grandparent, so that was no big deal. We didn't have a grandma. I never had one living while I was alive, and so that was no big deal. But we just enjoyed going to McGregor once a year.
And why did you stay here?
Well, when I got out of the service, I thought I wanted to farm, and they wanted me to stay here. And but it's been a good life. But I kind of wish now I wouldn't have stayed on the farm. I had a chance I had a job I could have gotten in Lansing pertaining to the training I had in the Navy with boilers. But my mother was the only one left. My dad was gone, and
You felt you needed to come home.
she really wanted me to stay here, so I did. But
If you were to tell someone else why this is a wonderful area to live, I'm assuming you think it is, what would be the main reason that you like it here? No matter what job you have.
well, it's just a pretty good area, real nice people, and that. But it isn't quite like it used to be. Of course, maybe it's because I'm old and think it's different, but there was a lot of neighboring done years ago.
That has changed, hasn't it?
Which is lacking today. But of course, the women are working, so it's...
There's not the time for the entertaining.
That's right, yeah. No, Ruttlesburgers and us, every winter would have a big meal, go one place, and then come back to the other place. And we would catch pigeons.
What'd you do with them?
Well, they would eat them.
I mean, eat them, yeah. Mm-hmm.
But those were big deals back then. Now, I don't think a kid would be much excitement. And then we'd play some cards. Now, they didn't believe in playing regular card decks, but my folks would play flinch, which was numbers, and Ruttlesburgers wouldn't play regular cards, and they played rook. So, but I don't think there was much difference between
it was the same thing except it didn't have pictures on them. It had a bird on them.
Is that
Ken played rook, didn't you? And they played Somerset. Did you ever learn to play that?
Well, I played it a couple of times, but I forget now. But they're still playing it up in Claremont there.
Okay, I think we'll stop here because we want to go in there and see a couple things. So we'll stop right here if we can move and see your... You want to tell a little bit about this? Come up a little closer.
It was made in 3 pieces and hand-carved handles, which look kind of fancy. That's about all that you want to...
And you want me to read a little bit of this? The secretary in our living room, the writing desk part and the lower drawers must have been made by Abby of Elgin, uncle to Phil Moser. and later on, Gruber Gottlieb of Elgin made the top part. In later years, this Gruber moved to Kansas. This piece of furniture first belonged to Joseph and Mary Farr Schneider. The Davenport in the living room also belonged to them. They came in to Fred Snyder's, their son's possession, shortly before they moved to the Schaefer farm in 1917. So you're talking about this.
Yes.
Can you move around to that? Okay. In 1923, Bill Miller refinished the two pieces when varnishing in the new house. Rose Gerber helped make the brown-covered cushions and seats before 1945. In that year, she married George Frieden and moved to Lamar, Missouri. Okay? Now we can stop there. See the top part? Now you come over and tell about this.
Is a wooden wheel off.
Just a minute. Are you ready, Ken?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a wooden wheel off a 1917 Cadillac, the first car Dad had. And on the hubcap, it says Cadillac, standard of the world.
Oh, well, I guess it's still kind of a standard of the world, isn't it? Okay, you want to stop now? Jake, will you tell us a little bit about this wagon?
Well, this is one of the last wagons that Phil Moser made. And in the wintertime, when we used to go to town with the horses, these were the kind of gloves. These are horsehide gloves that we'd wear to keep our hands warm.
And would you tell us that this is the last wagon that he built in Elgin?
Yes, knowing Phil, it took him 10 years, but of course he was doing a lot of other work. But by the time we got it, a wooden wheel wagon was obsolete. But my dad, I don't think this wagon was ever out one night that I know of.
He always put it in.
That's right.
And you used horses on it?
Yes. But later years we cut the tongue off and pulled it with a tractor for making hay and stuff.
And the wheels are wooden?
Yes.
Okay. Now I'm going to read a little bit that Ruth Jacobs gave me about the man who built these wagons and his dad. Rudolph Moser was born in 1858 in Ohio and came to Iowa in 1868. In 1874, he began working for Chris Lehman in Lehman's wagon shop. Chris Lehman was one of the Lehman brothers in business together. There he learned the wagon-making trade. In 1878, Rudy bought the business from Lehman. In the May of 1880, he married Mary Abbey. Their first home was above the wagon shop, which had been built in 1872. Later, Mosers lived on the main street on the north side of the 400 block. They had two sons, Pierce and Philip. Both worked with their father in his shop. Phil attended Elgin Public Schools through 3 of the 4 rooms, which comprised the grammar school. He left school because of a hearing difficulty and worked with his father. Pierce Moser left the area. Phil also worked as a rural mail carrier from 1910 until 1919, when his father died, and he gave all of his time to the wagon shop. Phil never married and lived in the parental home with his parents, then with his mother until her death in 1938. A picture taken in 1905 shows Rudolph and his son Philip with the woodworking machinery, which was operated from a line shaft powered by a gasoline engine. At one time there were 2 wagon shops and 3 blacksmith shops in Elgin. As farm equipment and farming methods changed, this business became a repair shop and a shop for making wagon boxes and hay racks. In 1963, Phil sold the shop building and planned to do some repair work from his home. He died in April of 1963, bringing to an end a business that had lasted for 85 years. And I believe Moore's Grocery Store is where his old shop used to be. Do you have anything else that you want to add that I haven't mentioned?
Not really. That jack, I suppose you got that on the picture. Phil would have made that for jacking the wheel off of the
Oh, this
hand jack here.
You mean that wooden jack?
Yeah, I see. You just put it underneath the axe, and you
Getting it down, yeah.
raise it up, and that'll clear the way along.
Pretty neat. Why don't you, we have just a couple minutes, why don't you just turn over there, Ken, and maybe we can get a picture of Jake's indoor golf course. It may be too dark. We may not, can you see anything at all, Ken?
I'll just lay it, we'll go around here a little bit.
You want to tell us why you built it?
Well, I guess too much idle time. I was just sitting in here watching TV on a windy day, and I thought I should clean it up and make use of it. And so I was going to put in 2 golf lanes, and then a cousin of mine, a Gearing from Des Moines, he said, well, make them short and make more of them. So that's what I did.
And now instead of playing here, where do you go?
Pleasant Valley Golf Course.
Good plug. Thanks a lot. We really have enjoyed this, and this is going to be a good tape. And maybe we can come back again sometime.
Yeah, do that.